This audiobook proudly presented by the Robert F. Kennedy Free Stolen Presidential Pirate Library at rfklibrary.org. Visit us online today for hundreds of free M4B audiobooks. No DRM, no ads, no accounts, no bullshit. rfklibrary.org.
Audible Studios presents Spooked: How the CIA Manipulates the Media and Hoodwinks Hollywood. Written by Nicholas Scow. Performed by Michael Butler Murray. All governments are run by liars, and nothing they say should be believed. I.F. Stone. Introduction. The CIA has a long history of spooking the news, dating back to its earliest days when legendary spy master Allen Dulles and his top staff drank and dined regularly with the press elite of New York and Washington, including the top executives and editors of the New York Times, Washington Post, Time, Newsweek, and CBS. And the agency boasted hundreds of U.S. and foreign journalists as paid and unpaid assets. In 1977, after this systemic media manipulation was publicly exposed by congressional investigations, the CIA created an Office of Public Affairs that was tasked with guiding press coverage of intelligence matters in a more transparent fashion. The agency insists that it no longer maintains a stable of friendly American journalists, and that its efforts to influence the press are much more above board. But, in truth, the U.S. intelligence empire's efforts to manufacture the truth and mold public opinion are more vast and varied than ever before. During a recent interview at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, a pair of CIA public affairs officers confirmed they provide journalists with frequent background briefings, typically about foreign hotspots. Their mission, they stated, is simply to guide news coverage of national security issues in a truthful direction, while also protecting personnel and operations from public disclosure. Our role at the Office of Public Affairs is not to manipulate reporters, one CIA spokesman told me. If they come to us with questions about non-classified information that makes us look bad, we just give our typical comment. The CIA has a long-standing tradition of providing briefings to favored journalists, he acknowledged. In the 1980s, Bob Woodward came out here a lot of times to get briefed, the press officer said, referring to the Washington Post reporter of Watergate fame. But the agency is happy to speak with any journalist seeking its perspective on global crises. Now, we get a lot of calls about the crisis in the Middle East. Reporters want a basic understanding of what's happening. This all sounds reassuring and harmless. But the reality is, beneath the new professionalism that supposedly characterizes today's relationship between the CIA and the press, lurks a vast underworld of covert pressure, seduction, and deception aimed at controlling media coverage of the most vital national security issues. Since 9/11, the national security establishment has ballooned to encompass thousands of government agencies and private contractors. Although the CIA retains a central role in this sprawling labyrinth, it by no means is the only covert institution that seeks to impose Washington's view of the world on the public at large. By working the levers of what Cold War-era CIA wizard Frank Wisner called the agency's mighty Wurlitzer, on which he could play any propaganda tune. After WikiLeaks burst onto the scene and whistleblowers Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden rocked the national security world, it seemed like a new day of transparency might be dawning. But instead of emboldening the media to more aggressively cover the vital issues of war and peace and surveillance and freedom, national security reporters were subjected to tightening controls and increased intimidation. For every editor who defies the national security establishment, or maverick blogger who embraces the CIA or National Security Agency, NSA, there are numerous cases of editorial compliance. The notion that, in the age of Snowden, the American press has become a sharp-eyed watchdog of the growing security state is far-fetched. In truth, the Washington Press Corps continues to largely function as a mouthpiece for the government when it comes to covering the endless war on terror. This deference to the national security state has a long history. The collaboration between the CIA and the press began with the birth of the agency in 1947. The Vietnam War and Watergate scandal briefly stained this compact. But with the Reagan counter-revolution in the 1980s, the media came under powerful new pressures to conform to the official line. Even as the CIA waged a secret and illegal war in Nicaragua, and U.S.-backed military regimes in Central America massacred innocent civilians, reporters who went too far in exposing these crimes and atrocities were subjected to intimidation and smear campaigns by Reagan officials and their allies in the corporate media. Independent-minded correspondents were reassigned. Careers were destroyed. In the early 1990s, during the Persian Gulf War, the U.S. news media all too willingly embedded itself within the U.S. military, temporarily attaching itself as a communications branch of the government and demonstrating that the Vietnam-era days of critical war reporting were over. Following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, the shift became permanent when the press, led by the New York Times and Washington Post, turned itself into a propaganda tool of the U.S. government, spreading Bush administration lies about Saddam Hussein's non-existent weapons of mass destruction program, and paving the way for America's 2003 invasion of Iraq, whose disastrous consequences continue to haunt us. This book explores how the U.S. media got spooked by the CIA and other powerful agencies of the national security state. Spooked features first-hand accounts from prominent national security reporters, as well as former CIA agents, who speak for the first time about how the spy agency tries to spin press coverage of everything from its controversial drone assassination program to the agency's deliberate disinformation campaign about Iraqi WMDs. Spooked also sheds new light on the CIA's increasingly cozy relationship with Hollywood. The agency has established a very active spin machine in the heart of the entertainment capital, which works strenuously to make sure the cloak and dagger world is presented in heroic terms. Since the mid-1990s, but especially after 9/11, American screenwriters, directors, and producers have traded positive portrayal of the spy profession in film or television projects for special access and favors at CIA headquarters. According to former CIA agents whose exploits have been depicted on screen, as well as ex-spooks who currently consult with Hollywood, the spy agency allows filming inside its headquarters and often extends red carpet treatment to directors and stars of CIA-friendly projects like 24, Argo, Homeland, and Zero Dark 30. With the latter screen drama particularly exemplifying the agency's deep grip on popular culture. Although Hollywood's depiction of the CIA has shifted back and forth between the light and dark over the decades, with the 1970s being a low point for the agency's portrayal on screen, The Parallax View, 3 Days of the Condor, more recent films and TV programs demonstrate that the entertainment industry has become much more enthralled by the intelligence community. In a democratic society, there is always a struggle between the machinery of national security and press freedom, and the public's right to know is usually the loser. When our national security czars become, in effect, our media gatekeepers, we lose one of the essential cornerstones of a true democracy, an informed citizenry. Distracted by the manufactured flow of information produced by a news media that has fallen under the spell of its own official sources, and beguiled by militaristic and patriotic Hollywood myth-making, the American public is largely benighted when it comes to understanding the wars and covert violence carried out in our name. Spooked will explain exactly how this process occurs and what happens to journalists who dare to break the rules. The increasingly sophisticated ability of intelligence agencies to manipulate reality has enormous consequences for our democracy. After 15 years of never-ending press accounts about terror threats and Islamic boogeymen, a paranoid reality reinforced by even more breathless Hollywood thrillers, the American people have become all too willing to give up their freedoms and acquiesce to a state of permanent war. James Risen of the New York Times is one of the few mainstream reporters who has been willing to challenge the enormous power of the national security state, much to his own personal and professional peril. He has learned firsthand that this empire of secrecy always wants to control the press and limit what you write. "If you go beyond those limits, you will be punished," says Risen. "We have built a national security state worth billions of dollars that is trampling our civil liberties, and we are living with a fear of threats that are not there." Chapter 1. I Eat Pretty Much Anything. On December 23, 2013, in response to a pair of Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) requests, the Central Intelligence Agency released 574 pages of emails between various national security reporters and the agency's Public Affairs Office. The massive trove of material remained out of the public eye for a year, but in late 2014, it finally surfaced in a series of articles published by the online investigative magazine, The Intercept. The articles landed like a bombshell, revealing how some of America's most prominent national security reporters were functioning essentially as unpaid CIA assets, sending the agency detailed story notes and, in at least one case, entire drafts of articles prior to publication. Roughly half of the released emails concerned just one reporter, Siobhan Gorman, who recently left the Wall Street Journal for a better-paying job with Brunswick, a privately held global communications company. Her email communications with the agency revealed her interest in touring the agency's Langley headquarters, writing a story about its gym, and securing a personal meeting with then-agency director David Petraeus, who the CIA confirmed to Gorman was fond of running 6-minute miles during work breaks and give face-to-face interviews to any reporter who could run a mile in under 7 minutes. In March 2012, Gorman accepted the CIA's invitation to an off-the-record dinner with Petraeus. "Great! Do you have any food allergies?" an agency public affairs officer replied. "No," Gorman confided. "I eat pretty much anything." Petraeus ultimately lost his job after sharing classified information with his biographer, mistress, and fellow workout fanatic, Paula Broadwell, who authored a book based on her special access relationship with the general, appropriately titled All In. In a separate exchange of emails that month between Gorman and a CIA press officer, whose name was redacted by the agency, she passed along a tip from a colleague at the Wall Street Journal who had told her that he had heard a rumor that there had been an assassination attempt against President Hafez al-Assad of Syria. "Happy Sunday. A colleague heard that Assad has been shot," begins Gorman's cheerful note. "Sounds unlikely, but it's a crazy time. Any truth to that?" Promising to look into the rumor, Gorman's agency contact inquired if her colleague was in Syria. "No," Gorman responded, continuing in the same share-too-much-information vein. "This colleague is actually the editor of the paper." In a subsequent email, Gorman thanked the press officer for his help. "As I mentioned, tips from our editor don't always pan out, but we have to check because it's from our editor and he claims to talk frequently to people in MI6, she explained, referring to the British intelligence agency. A few months later, on May 1st, Gorman sent the CIA an email titled Translating the UBL Trove, in which she asked for an update on the agency's efforts to pull useful intelligence from Osama bin Laden's computer files, which had been seized exactly a year earlier, during the raid on his Pakistani compound in which the world's most wanted man was killed. "Hi guys, so do I wish you a happy anniversary today?" she asked, sounding just like one of the gang at Langley. The CIA's response to that email, along with nearly every other one in the entire file, was completely redacted, presumably not to protect U.S. national security, because why would the agency be divulging top-secret information in emails to reporters? But more likely because of the embarrassing light they shed on the incestuous relationship between journalists and the agency's PR department. Yet even the less damaging material that somehow made it past CIA censors reveals the extent to which, far from acting like a watchdog protecting the public from government excesses, the U.S. national security press has almost completely fallen under the spell of the powerful intelligence complex it purports to monitor. Langley's press relation officers, who asked to remain anonymous, claim their job is more difficult now than ever, especially in the current media landscape, where anyone with a computer can post potentially damaging information online that can quickly be picked up by a succession of blogs or websites before exploding on social media platforms like Twitter. The media terrain is indeed more challenging for the intelligence community since 2013, when former National Security Agency, NSA, contractor Edward Snowden began leaking a stream of top-secret files on the NSA's massive surveillance operations directed against American citizens and even friendly governments. The Snowden revelations, along with the earlier WikiLeaks release of shocking documents and videos related to America's post-9/11 wars obtained from Army whistleblower Bradley, now Chelsea, Manning, shifted the ground under the espionage empire's feet. These days, security officials sometimes feel they are playing catch-up with a new world of anonymous hackers and independent bloggers. Since Snowden, we are unsuccessful 90% of the time, one CIA spokesperson glumly estimated, in reference to his efforts to convince reporters to either kill a story or delay it, at least long enough for the agency to protect its undercover assets and operations, or to protect Langley's ass. The hard part for us is we can't comment, so we have to do this weird kabuki dance and say, if you publish this story, this is what will happen. I don't have any control over the media, he insisted. All I can do is to make a case not to publish the story. But usually we are unsuccessful because sensitive information has already been leaked. The Intercept, which the CIA spokesperson specifically cited as an example of a hostile media outlet, has published a string of embarrassing stories about the CIA's recent excesses in the past few years. The most notable was the drone papers, based on leaked paperwork supplied by a high-level intelligence source showing that far more innocent civilians than suspected militants have been killed by U.S. remote-controlled airstrikes. In fact, by a stunning ratio of 6-to-1. More alarming, to the CIA at least, than the leaked documents themselves is the fact that the leaker is apparently someone other than Edward Snowden, who earlier had provided one of The Intercept's founding editors, Glenn Greenwald, a former blogger for The Guardian and Salon, with reams of classified NSA material. The Intercept's other founding editors are Laura Poitras, the second person Snowden approached, and whose documentary Citizen4 chronicled Greenwald's meeting with Snowden in Hong Kong, and Jeremy Scahill, the best-selling author of the books Blackwater and Dirty Wars. Then there's the online magazine Vice News, which employs one of the most aggressive and intrepid national security reporters in the business, Jason Leopold, whom the FBI has dubbed a FOIA terrorist for his extensive use of the Freedom of Information Act to gain access to government documents. Leopold, who lives in Los Angeles, is a rare example of a national security reporter who doesn't work in Washington, D.C. There's a reason for that, he said in a recent interview just days after returning from Capitol Hill, where he testified to Congress about how U.S. intelligence agencies have deliberately stymied his freedom of information.